Yeah, I'm Mark Slozik, the city historian, and Mary Kay and I kind of host these things, or at least we're in charge of the planning. I want to welcome everyone here tonight. It's going to be a great program. Mary Kay will talk about it a little bit, and it's good to see such a nice gathering this evening. I also want to say that I'm so happy to be back from Florida. I brought all the good weather from Florida with me.
Right.
So. Anyway, I'll turn it over to Mary Kay and welcome.
Thanks. Just a few housekeeping things. Of course, the fire exits are that way. There is a restroom back here in this corner if you need to use it. The other one is out in the lobby, way down the hall, past the registration desk and on the left. We also have some announcements about a few events. The Maritime Museum Waterfront Festival, oh my goodness, what do they call it?
Yeah, Waterfront Festival.
Waterfront Festival, okay, is a week from Saturday. And the same day, the Oswego Garden Club is having their annual plant sale on the south lawn of the Richardson Bates House Museum. We also have, we're not sure about cemetery tours, so if you've seen it on your calendar for the following day, the Sunday, hold your horses. I'm not sure it's actually going to happen. And the big event is the opening of the Barbeau collection of photographs, a sample of 30 of them, which is going to be this Friday. The reception at the library is at 5:30.
Not this Friday.
I'm sorry, a week from Friday.
Please no.
It's a very busy week. What have we got going on this week, Eva? Anything else?
Nothing notable.
Okay, so a week from Friday, Frank Barbeau's Captured Memories, the first taste, 30 images, some of which are still mysteries. So we're inviting the public to come and look at them in the library at the reception at 5:30 or anytime through the middle of July. The reception requires registration. It's free, but they just want to know how many people are coming, and you can register on their website. Just follow the links to their events. Okay, any questions?
There's an author coming to the library on Saturday at 2 o'clock, and the book that she wrote was a novel, but it's all in local history with her characters in it. I read it, and it was really excellent, so I would, if you're interested in that sort of thing, you might want to go to the library and see it.
Thank you, Peg. If you couldn't hear Peg, a local author at 2 o'clock at the library on Saturday. Do you remember the name?
Higgins was her last name.
Higgins.
She's Carolyn Rush's sister.
Yeah,
Marilyn Rush's singer.
Marilyn
I couldn't remember.
Marilyn Higgins. That's very cool. Okay, I'm going to introduce Natalie Woodall, who you probably have heard of because she is one of the most prolific researchers and writers in Oswego. She has published 5 full-length books, and I can't even count the number of articles, newspaper articles for the Palladium Times. She has 2 doctorates, one in English literature and one in classic languages, and was both a teacher in a school system and a college professor, as well as being a newspaper reporter at one point. She's been a member of the Eastern Star since 1976, and it was because of that, her interest in the Masons in Oswego, that she wrote the 54 article series in the Palladium Times. She is certainly always at the Richardson Bates House, but she always does research for us too. It's a very nice symbiotic relationship. So we're going to hear about her book about interesting women from an interesting woman.
It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I thank Mary Kay Stone for the opportunity to speak about a few of Oswego City's remarkable and noteworthy women. First, I need to introduce my friend, Darlene Wilson, who will be handling the slideshow tonight. Yay, Darlene. Darlene and I have spent many happy hours tramping through old cemeteries searching for long-lost Civil War soldiers. I'm often asked how I came to write my book on Oswego County's noteworthy women, and I suppose it harks back to my high school world history class. We heard a lot about Charlemagne, Richard the Lionhearted, and Louis XIV, but almost nothing about women. Where, I innocently asked my history teacher, are all the women? Well, since coming to Oswego some 40 years ago, I've been able to answer that question. They're everywhere. All I had to do was look for them. When this area began to be settled soon after the British evacuated Fort Ontario, women, as well as men, were among the pioneers. Many of you may be familiar with the name of Matthew McNair, who saw the financial potential of that great inland sea we call Lake Ontario, and established a fleet of ships for transporting goods up and down the waterway. How many of you know anything about Linda Reed, Matthew's wife? Well, I don't know very much either. And if her name had not been inscribed on this monument, I would have known even less. Yet she operated one of the first hotels in Oswego City. We all know the name of Alvin Bronson, the man who refused to divulge the location of Oswego Village's supplies when the British invaded here in 1814. Because he refused to cooperate, the British took him captive. How about Abraham David Huguenin, who was also captured by the British and taken to Canada? What do you suppose was happening on the home front in the absence of Mary O'Connor Bronson's husband or Fanny Boynton Huguenin's husband? I rather suspect those two women found the strength needed to hold the family together in a very trying time. Yet we hear nothing about them, and were their names not inscribed on the family gravestones, we would know nothing. The abolitionist movement in Oswego County began very early and included among its ranks women as well as men. Charlotte Ambler Clark was involved in the clandestine affairs of the Underground Railroad, as was her better-known husband, Edwin Winslow Clark. In Scriba, Caroline Waugh's father, Alexander, called by her one of the strongest abolitionists of the day, caused the young girl untold worry lest he should be arrested under the Fugitive Slave Act. Yet after the war, Caroline devoted her life to educating the children of former slaves. Why do we not know more about these women? Women weren't supposed to strain their delicate brains with politics. That champion of human rights, Thomas Jefferson, thought public morals would be corrupted if women were allowed to participate in political affairs. John Adams, another supporter of human rights, actually laughed when his wife Abigail admonished him to remember the ladies during the creation of the federal Constitution. The fact that women participated in abolitionist matters, thereby dabbling in politics, was unwomanly, as a writer for the Troy Daily Whig opined in October 1851. After describing abolitionists in general as traitors and enemies to their country, he singled out the women for their special criticism. The women who engage in the movement are out of their sphere and honor not their sex. The year 1848 was significant for New York women's struggle for equal rights. First, the state legislature passed the landmark Married Women's Property Act. Previously, whatever property a woman brought to her marriage automatically became her husband's, to do with as he chose with no input from her. Henceforth, women retained ownership of such property, and furthermore, any money they earned outside the home remained theirs. In July, the history-making Women's Rights Convention was held at Seneca Falls. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton put in writing the wrongs of women and thereby started a movement still in progress today. Among Stanton's most severe criticisms was the lack of female suffrage, which resulted in taxation without representation and enforced submission to laws which they had no voice in making. The greatest impetus for women's rights, especially the right to vote, was set in motion by the Civil War. New York State contributed over 400,000 men to the cause, between 11,000 and 12,000 from Oswego County alone. With so many of them away from home, women were compelled to step up to maintain the family farm or business, educate the children, care for the elderly. They nurse returning sick or wounded soldiers. We are all familiar with Dr. Mary Walker and Elmina Spencer, but we must remember that on a not so public but no less important plane, women were contributing in their own ways to preserving the Union. They formed relief organizations to assist widows and orphans. They made and collected clothing, books, and foodstuffs to send to soldiers at the front. The men fortunate enough to return home after the fighting were forever changed, and so were their women. My book includes women from every section of the county, such as Arminella Devendorf of Central Square and Muriel Allerton from Fulton. But tonight I'm going to focus on those who called Oswego City home. Managing to overcome prejudice, legal and de facto impediments, and even family opposition, these remarkable women found ways to pursue and fulfill their various goals. Education is the best way for anyone, female or male, to escape poverty and improve one's social condition. The person who did much to assist women in that pursuit was none other than Edwin Austin Sheldon, who established his ragged school in Oswego for the poorest children in the newly created city. The Local School Act, passed in 1853, resulted in the creation of the city school system, over which Sheldon became the superintendent. His establishment of the Oswego Normal School in 1861 was originally intended to train teachers for the city schools, but it ultimately enabled talented young women to find employment elsewhere. When the state passed the first compulsory education law in 1874, additional and better educated women became imperative. A pioneer in Oswego City's elementary education was Ellen Bruce. Born in Oneida County in 1827, she was a graduate of Red Creek Academy. With only that minimum of education, she found employment in several local schools before moving to Oswego. In October 1853, shortly after the Local School Act became law, she went to work in primary school number 8 in the Second Ward. Facing her were 90 little boys and girls. She later remarked, probably half facetiously and half seriously, "Had I been told when I first entered this building that I would continue here for the next half century, I would have got out again a good year quicker than I got in." For 52 years, Ellen Bruce taught at the same school, once estimating she had educated over 3,000 students. She enrolled in Sheldon's first class at the normal school, graduating in April 1862. Those were the days before collective bargaining, and teachers' salaries were determined at the whim of the education commissioners, all male. For example, in 1876, Ellen's salary was $525. In 1880, that amount dropped to $380. Teachers' pensions were practically unheard of, and health insurance was non-existent. When Ellen suffered a stroke, she nevertheless had to return to the classroom in order to support herself. And when she finally retired in 1905, she was the longest-serving teacher in New York State. Another graduate from Sheldon's training classes was Harriet Elizabeth Stevens, born in Granby in 1856. She graduated from the advanced course in July 1872 and initially taught in one of the city's primary schools. After she graduated from the supervisory program at the normal school in July 1899, Sheldon hired her to oversee the campus primary school. Harriet, however, was more than a teacher. A scholar and expert on Oswego's early history, she frequently was invited to speak to local groups. As a member of Fort Oswego Chapter DAR, she was instrumental in placing this monument near the site of Fort George, an early fortress which stood near what is today Montcalm Park. She successfully lobbied Thaddeus Sweet, a local politician and legislator, to support the idea of creating Montcalm Park, which for many years the DAR maintained. At the end of World War I, New York State legislated that each community was to gather names and pertinent information about every soldier and sailor residing in that area. When Mayor John Fitzgibbons asked Harriet Stevens to carry out this task, she became Oswego's first city historian. Legislation in 1920 mandating a historian for each village, town, and city made the position official. Harriet's work was thorough, going far beyond the required basic information for the more than 1,000 soldiers and sailors from Oswego City. It is worth mentioning that she accomplished all this while holding down a full-time job at the normal school. These boxes of notes, stored at the Richardson Bates House, demonstrate the care Harriet took to complete her task, and I might add they are stuffed full. The final report, located in the records office at the county clerk's office on Route 481, contains a wealth of information for researchers and genealogists. Harriet was active in several statewide historical societies. She was also one of the first women to join and hold office in the formerly all-male Oswego County Historical Society, thus helping that faltering organization to survive and prosper. For many years, she served as the group's corresponding secretary and curator, and she only retired because her health began to fail. Emma Eliza Adams called Oswego Town her home for her entire life, absent from it only in 1891 and 1892, when she traveled to the Midwest and spent time in Chicago. Born on January 3, 1858, she grew up in an environment typical of the times. Her father, who had so far escaped military duty, enlisted in the 184th Regiment in August 1864, leaving wife and daughters to tend the family farm until his return in the summer of 1865. Emma and her sisters attended District 10 school, and she was known among her family and friends as an excellent painter. Some of her still extant pictures won prizes at local fairs. When Emma was in Chicago visiting friends, she was asked to make a rag doll for a little girl whose mother was dissatisfied with the one she had purchased. That request led to a cottage industry in Oswego Town known as the Columbian Dolls. So named because Emma entered several into competition at the Chicago World's Fair and earned a certificate of merit. Emma obtained contracts from department stores such as Marshall Field's and employed several local women to assist in making the variously sized, hugely popular dolls, which were sold on the basis of size. She herself painted the faces of the almost indestructible toys, and so popular were these creations that she was able to pay off a mortgage on the family farm. One doll in particular, known as Miss Columbia, earned fame for its creator when it was sent on a round-the-world tour, visiting Japan, China, India, and Spain, among others. In recent years, Columbian dolls prized by collectors have sold for thousands of dollars. This one was a gift from the descendants of the Adams family to the Oswego County Historical Society. And you can see this is one of the biggest dolls that were made. I first learned of Charlotte Lund when Kathy Mulcahy, the Minetto town historian, gave me a letter her father Andrew sent to his wife Nellie Burns Lund while he was serving in the Civil War. Charlotte was their only child. Nellie Lund was a charter member of St. John's Roman Catholic Church, and Charlotte, a gifted singer and musician, became the director of the church choir. After graduating from the normal school in the class of 1891, Charlotte found employment as a music teacher. I don't know whether you can see this or not, but I'm going to point her out to it. As far as I can tell, this is Charlotte right here. In 1897, she was enticed to come to Oswego as music director with a salary of $700 a year, a lot of money in those days. So talented was she that one school commissioner decided, without consulting his colleagues, to raise her salary the next year, fearing she would take a more lucrative position elsewhere. George Bullis, newly named superintendent of schools, had other plans. He wanted to cut the budget significantly, including Charlotte's raise. Bullis asked her to resign in order to hire a replacement at a much lower salary. She steadfastly refused to do so, arguing that Bullis, not yet officially in office, had no right to make that demand. The case went to court, and Charlotte ultimately lost the battle. In the long run, however, Charlotte triumphed because she was now free to pursue another course of action. She traveled to Italy to study music theory, but that beautiful soprano voice led her coaches to encourage her to become an operatic singer. After working in the States several years to save money, she went to France and studied with Jean Duretsky, a well-known voice coach. She debuted in France and performed in London, but when he advised that she would have more success in the United States, she returned to America and embarked upon a concert career spanning 20 years. She was noted for her vast repertoire, which included works in French, German, Italian, and Norwegian. Her concerts frequently contained works in many, if not all, those languages. She was as comfortable singing Irish tunes as she was performing Debussy. Her performance at the Richardson Theater in Oswego was the talk of the town and what we would call a hot ticket. Charlotte was more than an entertainer. She was a philanthropist, freely giving of her talents for charity events. She gave a concert in Oswego to assist the local YMCA. She sang for wounded World War I soldiers, and one year performed at the Mission in the New York City Bowery. She performed at the Normal School and was active in the Alumni Association. Charlotte theorized that a love of opera had to be fostered from a young age. To that end, when she established her own repertory company, another first, she scheduled performances geared to young people. She was in the habit of coming on stage before the show began to explain what the children were going to see. She also wrote 12 booklets geared for children, 6 for French opera and 6 for Italian. She was also popular with blind operatic patrons because of her expert explanations of the operatic action. Charlotte Blair Parker, also better known as Lottie, also studied at the Normal School, graduated in 1872. While enrolled there, she had the opportunity to study with Anna Fitch Randall, an expert in elocution. As a result, Lottie planned to become an elocutionist, a professional reader, and attended classes in that field of endeavor. Encouraged by an instructor, however, she decided to become an actress, much to the chagrin of her family, who viewed acting, especially for women, as disreputable. She once told a reporter that her mother cried copious tears before finally giving her consent. Lottie toured extensively with many well-known performers, but realizing that actresses had a limited career length, reinvented herself as a playwright. Being a successful actress in the 19th century was difficult enough, but it was almost unheard of for a woman to break into the ranks of published and performed playwrights. Her first commercially produced play, Way Down East, was considered extremely controversial in its day and enjoyed phenomenal popularity. Anna Moore, the central figure, is lured into a sham marriage and then abandoned after becoming pregnant. She finds employment in a private home, but when her past is revealed, her employer demands she leave immediately. Death in a blinding snowstorm is prevented only through the timely rescue by her employer's son. Lottie's message was clear. The double moral standard was unjust and unfair. Although Anna is the victim, she is the one society condemns. Lottie herself did not benefit from the play's financial success because she had sold all the rights for a mere $10,000. Late in life, she admitted her mistake, but conceded that at the time selling the play had appeared to be the best arrangement. Writing plays, opined Lottie, was difficult, but getting them considered for performance was even more so. Therefore, when 4 of her plays were produced in 1902, she rightfully claimed that only one other playwright, Clyde Fitch, can boast like honor and appreciation at the hands of the play-going public. While Lottie Blair Parker did not support women's suffrage, a younger contemporary, Harriet Taylor Treadwell, earned lasting recognition for her steadfast adherence to the cause. Born in 1870, Harriet was the daughter of Hiram Taylor and Adelia Césarine Fish. Césarine was a suffragist when it was not popular to be so styled. and she instilled the notion of equality of the sexes into her 5 daughters, all of whom pursued public careers. Harriet graduated from the normal school in 1888 and obtained a teaching position in Chicago, where she spent the rest of her life. Although reputed to be a brilliant teacher and excellent school principal, she is most noted for her work in obtaining the vote for the women of Illinois. Harriet became a member of the Chicago Political Equality Club and lobbied fearlessly for female suffrage. She spoke at rallies and conventions and was unafraid to criticize the all-male state legislature. She railed against the United States Supreme Court, arguing that body was composed of 9 elderly gentlemen with antiquated ideas. She urged women to enroll in public speaking courses in order to discuss current issues with confidence and clarity at large gatherings. Oratory, she said, consists in knowing what to say, saying it, and then sitting down. The men don't know when to quit. In 1913, Harriet was elected to her first term as president of the organization. Not only should women have the vote, she said, they should sit in legislatures and make laws beneficial to them and their children. A highlight of Harriet's first term was the visit of British suffragist Emily Pankhurst to Chicago. Harriet, who had worked to persuade her to support the Illinois campaign, was among the official greeters when the controversial Mrs. Pankhurst arrived. It was hoped that her appearance would bolster the women's bid for universal suffrage. Whether or not it helped is debatable, but the state legislature finally passed an equal suffrage bill later in 1913, and Harriet received much of the credit thanks to her indefatigable campaigning. Not until 1917 would New York State follow suit. When Helen Gay Purviance arrived in Oswego, the Salvation Army was considered a fringe organization, not exactly welcomed, but tolerated by the citizenry. Contemporary reports revealed its presence in Oswego City as early as 1886, but the raucous behavior of the Salvationists led some of the local hoodlums to disrupt meetings with their own brand of raucousness. Despite ill treatment and community indifference, however, the Salvationists were finally able to establish a permanent citadel in Oswego in 1893. It was into this environment that Adjutant Helen Purviance walked in 1911. Her previous posting as a Salvation Army worker had been in Fulton, so she had some knowledge of the area. Soon after her arrival, she began making contact with business and community leaders, quietly dealing with poverty and neglect among the city's poorest element, and in so doing, earning the respect of all. She had spent 7 years here when World War I began, and her superiors asked her to go to Europe to assist in relief efforts for American soldiers. On the condition that she be allowed to return to Oswego after her tour of duty ended, she agreed. Helen was soon stationed near the front lines in France, where she encountered great physical hardship, not only from the harsh weather, but also from German airstrikes. Her thoughts, however, were constantly on ways to make things more comfortable for the soldiers. To that end, she devised the idea of frying and serving donuts to them. And from that time on, and for the rest of her life, Helen was known as the Donut Girl or Donut Lassie. She patiently bore the nickname, even though she confessed that she hated donuts. Her supervisor sent her on a goodwill tour in 1918, based on her newly acquired reputation. The hope was that the tour would raise funds for continued Salvation Army work in Europe. In 1919, the Salvation Army of the United States rewarded Helen's courage and creativity with a bronze medal for valorous conduct, on which was inscribed for heroic and faithful service. Wow. After the war, Helen returned to Oswego, where she continued her efforts on behalf of the city's poor. Strenuous efforts to keep her in Oswego failed to sway her superior's decision to transfer her elsewhere. After 50 years of service and a final promotion to lieutenant colonel, Helen retired. And one of her last visitors before she left New York City was none other than Irving Berlin, who had enjoyed Helen's donuts when he was a soldier in the United States Army. He wanted her to know how much he appreciated her efforts on their behalf. Thomas Smith Mott, try it again, Natalie. Thomas Smith Mott, there we go.